just going to introduce the team. Yeah, you guys do whatever you want. It's your time, 10 minutes, and I'll keep the time and give you maybe a raise a hand if it happens to come to 1 minute if you're not finished yet. Okay, so our first competitor is Ottawa University, Kansas campus. And our secret question today was, the National Bureau of Economic Research has indicated that without substantial intervention, the U.S. will be unable to compete with China in global semiconductor market. The President has charged you with developing a trade policy that ensures that the U.S. will have access to semiconductor development and production for reasons of national security. What interventions or mix of interventions would you recommend to the President that accomplish this goal while doing the least amount of damage to the economy as a whole? The floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Joshua Packard, this is Haley, this is Lauren, and we're going to be saying that our attempted solution to this question would be that the best kind of economic intervention is none at all, or limiting it as much as possible.
Now, to better understand more of economic and policy-based decisions, we have to understand kind of the perspectives of humanity, I guess. Now, throughout times, there's been all sorts of civilizations. You know, we got Greek, Rome, the Han Dynasty, the Aztecs, and in the modern day, we have over 200 countries. One of those being the United States. Now, one thing we can agree upon, even though these civilizations are very different in their cultures, communication methods, and all sorts of other things, is that most of us try to work for the good life. What is that? It's promoting the general welfare. It's a principle of utilitarianism that talks about we're trying to do the best thing for the greatest amount of people possible. And this is actually backed historically in the US in its founding days through the preamble of the Constitution. It says right there, promote the general welfare and protect the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Now, this is a very conceptual thing, so what does this actually look like in real life? Well, there are a few conditions that we've outlined based on historical precedents, along with a lot of information from our reader, that we decided are necessary in order to maintain this state of utilitarianism. First, specialization. It's something that Adam Smith developed, and we'll dive more into it in the economy session, but it talks about comparative advantage. Basically, everyone's got to do what they do best, because then we can get certain goods for the cheapest quantity or cheapest amount possible, and we can all have economic growth. But something that's also needed for growth is our second pillar, peace. It's noted as the first condition to economic growth. Without peace, there's no need to look at other sorts of flourishment. And third, it's important to outline very clearly the role of the government as facilitators rather than individuals. Lauren's going to talk about it, but it makes very clear in economic history that governments are a vessel rather than the actual things that increase nations' wealth. That is very important to understand. That's something that the US was founded upon. Now, there are going to be some counter arguments talked about, and we'll hit more in detail as to why we're choosing not to go to these routes, but tariffs is obviously and argumentatively one of the main things that people think of. Now, it's undeniable that in the 19th century, the US utilized tariffs to their economic growth greatly. However, we have an economic reader here by Benjamin Servers outlining a couple principles of why in the modern age, tariffs aren't exactly the most optimal. First, tariffs raise the price of goods, which means it benefits domestic producers, but it costs the consumers, meaning it doesn't promote the general welfare. Second, the government spends a lot of money on stopping tariff dodgers. You put in a rule, people will always try to find ways around it, and that's a lot of money lost, net negative right there. Additionally, the revenue of tariffs may be wasted in other things. There's many quotes that support it in the book, but the tariff dodgers was a key indicator there. And then one of the key pieces of tariff dodgers is also like lobbying. So tariff dodgers cost money, lobbying costs money. Overall, there's a lot of money spent just to implement tariffs. So with that, I'm actually going to hand it over to our economic section in order to dive more into what we would actually do.
When we talk about domestic and foreign industries, it's common to get into this emotional, kind of irrational mindset where you talk about how we need to protect our domestic industries against these evil foreign ones who are going to take away our jobs, lower our welfare, and destroy our way of life here at home. However, that's not a way that you can think about it when you're thinking about economies. Economies are built on the back of specializations. Obviously, different countries of different sizes can have more than one specialization, have different industries that they specialize in, and there's absolute advantages to be taken into account. However, when you are talking on the wide scale, some countries need to specialize for the sake of everyone's economic welfare. Some countries need to be extremely efficient at doing one thing or another so that another country doesn't have to waste their time trying to build the same industry. Specialization is the backbone of this kind of modern economics, and it is extremely important to think about. Economic growth is very important. We want to grow these domestic industries, obviously. That's why there are these protectionist mindsets out there where people decide for themselves that we need to put a tariff on these foreign goods to allow these domestic goods to grow. However, that is not backed up. All it does is it creates this kind of cradle for this domestic industry that, in many cases, they don't flourish into something greater. They instead sit in that cradle until you kick them out. And when you do kick them out, they are not a competitive industry. You're not creating a competitive industry, you're creating a suckling babe. Not only do these tariffs hurt our domestic, hurt our domestic consumers, they hurt foreign consumers by raising the price globally. Not only does it make our domestic industries weaker and not set them up to succeed, it hampers their ability, their inspiration to actually drive forward their technology and create something newer and better. And what is more relevant to doing something new and better, or at least claiming to, than politics? So I will pass it over to our lovely Laura.
Our position is that we do not want any interventions, as well as removing any interventions that are currently in place against China, including embargoes and tariffs. Unilateral free trade mitigates trade wars. We want to build a positive relationship with other countries, and China, as Haley said, peace is one of the major foundations of economic prosperity. In the Reader, according to scholar Burdo, the government does not sufficiently increase the wealth of nations, but rather the desire for individuals to increase their quality of life does. As a modern example, we are currently in a war with Iran. Ending this war would allow us to have better access to the minerals that are needed to create these semiconductors that we are discussing, that are found in the Middle East. This will also help to, as well, build peace relations with Iran, China, and other countries that are also involved. That would further increase our economic prosperity and keep us as a competitor.
Passing it back to Haley, sorry.
Thank you. Now I bet you guys are all wondering, what the heck are you gonna do with all this extra money that you wouldn't have to spend in lobbying and dealing with this tariff dollars? Well, I have an answer for you. Just think about the industrialization era. We created so much good and so much growth. Was it trial and error? Undeniably so. But now we have this kind of foundation, we've gone through that main developmental era. We have a lot of things that we can explore that's going to benefit the better good. Think about how much we can do into cancer research. Think about how much we can do to improve the home life of veterans or like the homeless individuals. There are so many other political, economic, and overall well-being focuses and initiatives that the United States needs to focus to continue bettering and promoting the welfare of the people of the U.S. and overall benefiting the world.
I'd like to speak about one last thing, and it's kind of the crux of this question and the reason it even exists, and that's China. China is an economic factor, an economic actor that we look at a lot in this 21st century as a growing power. However, I like to think about how China has over 10 times the manufacturing workers the United States does, and yet their output isn't terribly more. It's less than 60% more. Americans are excellent at innovating. China is excellent at stealing ideas from other nations who are working there. So what we need to do is, instead of creating this infant industry that will never actually grow if we never let it, what we need to do is trust in our American ingenuity to actually compete without any additional rules set in place.
Thank you for listening. We hope you appreciate our perspective.
Thank you.
Okay, time for Professor answer questions.
Are there any situations in which you would be in favor of some sort of economic intervention in any industry?
So actually, if you read the reader, it talks about how a policy of unilateralism, I think is how you like this phrase, I'm not doing that, will always benefit a person. Even if no other countries have unilateral trade, the country who does participate in is always going to have the maximum growth. Obviously, we're hoping to set a precedence. I would say the United States is one of the more prevalent political and economic figures. So setting that precedence, hopefully other people would engage with that, and hopefully in turn, that would eventually affect China. But even if they did not, we would see more economic growth with that unilateral policy.
No, what's up? What's up?
So, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the benefit from unilateral deregulation is that it's a material benefit, right? And that we get an economic benefit if we reduce barriers to trade. But that seems to ignore the kind of like geopolitical problem which prompts the question, which is that if we are engaged in this trade with a geopolitical adversary, that maybe sometimes the geopolitical goals might or might outweigh the kind of economic benefit that we get. That seems to be like what the president's point was. And so am I to take it that your answer to the previous question was that those geopolitical goals can never outweigh the economic gains?
Those geopolitical issues and their prevalence and impact on economic policy is going to be inefficient. It's going to create economic disadvantages. Now, whether you are saying that if we have free trade with, let's say like Taiwan, and they have a large like child working population, and we say that is morally reprehensible that they have all of that, and we cut off all trade from them. Well, what happens to all those kids? They just lost their jobs. They're gonna find other jobs. All you've done is make their living situation substantially worse and prevented that country's opportunity to economically grow in a way that will provide growth to their larger economy so that jobs like that are no longer necessary.
I also don't think it's fair to say that there's an absolute, right? Like you can't ever absolutely promote like economical or geopolitical one over the other. But I think it's very, very important, especially in this case, to heavily weigh why the United States was founded. Like I talked about, promote the general welfare and what is best for our people in this case. Does geopolitical things affect the everyday person all the time, or is economic matters going to be more prevalent or pressing? So just something to keep in mind. And because of like that thought process, that's how we came to our decision for this question. However, it can vary based off of other extenuating circumstances.
Okay, anything else? Last quick question, and otherwise we'll move on. Anything burning? All right, thank you.